Hello, I'm Henry Kenyon, Senior Staff Writer with GovCIO Media and Research, and I'm with Lance Jenkinson, Chief Information Officer of the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. And thank you for taking time to talk to us.
Henry, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I'd like to start, what are some of the VA OIG's top modernization priorities, and how do they fit into the broader goals of the VA, and how do they differ?
Great. Well, I think before we dive into the top modernization priorities, the most important thing is to think about what doesn't need modernized, and that is the integrity of our veteran healthcare data and the assurance of positive veteran outcomes.
Right.
I mean, that's why we're here, and that's why we do want to modernize, particularly in the IT space. What I'm looking to have my teams and folks prioritize is really enhancing our governance model. We do a great job, but there's also a lot of different moving parts within a watchdog agency. So, we have our auditors, inspectors, special agents, and we also have all the other support staff that go behind that to make sure that we can, meet our mission. And if, we can always do a better job with collaborating and making sure that we're working together, and that we're, sharing information to ensure that we have, better positive outcomes and our systems are successful as they're deployed. I think the other priority is really, of course, like every other agency, that's leveraging AI. But the way we're really thinking about it is we want to make sure we're leveraging AI thoughtfully, that we're using the right kind of AI tool in the right place, that they have a particular return on that investment as we're using that tool. So I think we're taking a little bit slow and steady approach, making sure we're governing our AI effectively. And so that way we're not just jumping into unknown waters, because again, with the type of data that we're here to protect, we just can't afford to get that wrong.
No, that's interesting, and it segues over. I'm going to ask you to put your auditor's hat on. So what are things on the bigger picture, because you're looking at different agencies within the VA, but also just sort of bigger picture federal agencies. Like, when agencies do a modernization, what are common stumbling blocks that often run into when they're bringing in new systems, and how can they kind of avoid those?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think so. I'm new. I've been the VA OIG CIO now for going on 8 weeks or 9 weeks. 9 weeks, and that's one of the fascinating things about this role is that not only am I charged with ensuring that we have an effective IT shop internally to power the organization, but then also being able to provide input and to really collaborate with all the other auditor teams and how we shape those reports and all the great work that they're doing, holding VA accountable. So there's really kind of two missions there that I find really fun. So I get to kind of see from the VA perspective and some of the modernization initiatives that they're going under, and then also just from our own what we do. And I think a couple of ways I like to think about it, at least from how we're approaching it internally, and that is, we're going to be following IG Mason's gold standard, and we need to make sure that whatever we're doing internally, whatever standard we're holding the VA to, that we're also following ourselves. So we are taking our own deep look into our own processes to make sure that, again, we are the gold standard, because that our veterans and would expect nothing less. But what I've seen, and I can comment this more so from what I saw in my last role at Department of War, I did a lot of low-code modernization and other consolidation efforts. So I've seen it firsthand where, where folks have good intentions, but sometimes those things can still result in an unsuccessful project. And part of that, governance. Again, if you're not collaborating, if you're not talking amongst all the other stakeholders and groups, though you can quickly spiral. And then secondly, it's really making sure that we are focusing on cybersecurity, and that we are focusing on return, and that we're focusing on the right kind of processes. A lot of times what I've seen is that groups will just want to regurgitate the exact same legacy process that they had in their old application. Oh, we're modernizing because now it's new and shiny. But if you're still doing everything the same, just with a prettier UI, you're not really modernizing. You're just, I call it a duplication subscription. So I think that's one thing for agencies to really step back, is to take the hard look at your processes and ask the why, of why are we modernizing the system? What do we really want to achieve out of it? And then be open to be able to make those necessary changes so that you have an effective tool at the end of it.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room of AI, and how did AI fit into modernization? And specifically, how can you safely deploy AI while maintaining operations of your legacy systems, especially if you're doing a transition? How do you keep the wheels running and make sure nothing falls off?
No, that's a very valid concern. At least from internally, we do have, we are following our, again, that gold standard. So we do have our own AI steering committee so that we are reviewing all the various different use cases and business cases that come forward so that we know what we want to use AI for, what we're going to get out of it, and how are we ensuring it's secure, and how we're ensuring that the AI itself is protecting the veteran healthcare data and all of our internal data that's so important to keep secure. And so I think that's one thing, just knowing kind of what the left and right hands are doing. I mean, yes, because anybody can slap an AI chatbot onto any application, but if you don't know what data it's referencing, what it's talking to, what it's doing, that can become a very scary a very scary place, right?
The other side of the coin is cybersecurity. And from a perspective, what can the CIOs do to ensure, like when they're doing a modernization, vulnerabilities aren't introduced, or how things are vetted basically when you're bringing them in?
Well, as a technologist, I definitely can appreciate the new shiny, and there's always these amazing, great, new tools that are always kind of coming out, especially on the AI front that personally I'd love to get my hands on and experiment with. But we have to take a step back when it comes to in the federal space. We do have obligation to our American taxpayers, to our veterans, to all of our folks that we're using things that have been vetted and tested, and that they don't have any sort of malware baked in, or all these other kind of things that can go wrong very quickly. So, and this happens all the time. Folks reach out to me on LinkedIn, or they're shooting me emails, and they're trying to pitch their particular product, and then I ask one question: do you have your FedRAMP? And a lot of times I say, well, no, or can you sponsor me? And it's just like, I cannot responsibly use that system until you get those things in order. And I think what I've also seen, just again in my prior role, is that there's this temptation to, well, let me just do an exception to policy and let's just give it a try. Let's just go out on a pilot. But then those cyber issues may still be there. And so you're still going to have to address those issues at some point, and it's just going to be even more painful down the road. So I'm taking more of a pragmatic approach and just being like, well, I know it needs to meet certain security standards from the get-go. Otherwise, I really kind of have to not consider it.
And I got one more thing for you. What's one quality you think government CIOs must have in the current technological environment? What's that one standout thing you think?
Well, in the 9 weeks that I've been a CIO, I've been able to been thinking long and hard about that. And one thing that I feel like has really helped me, in this place, and I think that's been really helpful as I've been kind of taking off on this runway as I'm kind of growing into the role, and that's that relying on having multiple lenses. So I have private sector experience. I have multiple federal agency experience. I was a defense contractor and also federal government civilian contractor. So I feel like I haven't just been in one particular place. I can draw on experiences from many different angles and then
You've
look at that.
You've worn a lot of hats.
Yeah, I've worn a lot of hats. But also one thing that I think maybe is obvious, but I don't know how often this is that to actually being technical. I built my own AI lab at home. And I experiment because I really wanted to demystify, especially a couple of years ago when things were new. I dropped some good money on that, just personally building up my own lab and the GPUs and all things that go into that. But I'm able to experiment and really understand the technology so that when I'm getting a pitch from an organization that wants to sell me some AI tool, I can immediately detect what's a sales pitch, what's reasonable, and it really kind of helps give me an advantage because I think a lot of times certain folks may not have that. So look, I'm not there to tinker and get my hands dirty in the role. It's definitely, from a strategic perspective, is where I want to take us. But having that background understanding, I think, is just I would consider an essential skill for a CIO, especially these days.
Excellent. That was great. Thank you very much, Lance. This was very interesting.
Well, thanks for having me.